Everybody, this is Andrew Cuneo with another new Alchemy deck tech. This time it's going to be on Elves. The most recent update to Alchemy buffed a number of the Elves cards, which we're going to go through a deck build and maybe try to figure out if it's made Elves into a good enough deck now. So let's start with some of the cards that have been buffed. You can tell if a card's been buffed if it was from a non-alchemy set and it's got this A in the corner now. That means it's been buffed. So you can see this has been buffed, this has been buffed, this has been buffed, this has been buffed, and this has been buffed. And this has been buffed too. So starting with what I think is perhaps the most important card in this deck, it's this Saga, and I believe that what the buff it's received is Chapter 1 now looks at 5 cards instead of 4 cards. And this is a fairly powerful card if you're going to be flooding the board with Elves. And it probably doesn't look that good if you haven't played with this deck before, but this is actually the card that I think leads to the most wins. In part because just the round 1 of the Saga now mill the 5 Elves, and then you get an elf or a A-Tyvar from your graveyard onto the battlefield. That makes your deck do the same thing pretty consistently from game to game. And we're going to get to the best card to hit here in just a second, which is the Thornmantle Striker. Now, this is a really odd decision that the people who work on Alchemy made. This card, Thornmantle Striker, you may have never seen it before, and that's because although it was a part of Call Time, it was not actually in packs. It was in one of those weird supplemental products that don't really have cards that are intended to be kind of top-tier competitive cards. And this was not. This used to cost 5 mana. They've shaved 1 mana off of the card. So it has 2 abilities. One is remove X counters from a permanent where X is the number of Elves you control. The other ability is target creature an opponent controls gets minus X until end of turn where X is the number of Elves you control. So if your deck is functioning correctly, and your opponent hasn't killed all of your Elves, this is probably going to kill their best creature the turn you play it, which that's great. Getting back to the first ability, though, remove X counters from target permanent. So one obvious use for that would be to remove counters from your opponent's Planeswalker, hopefully removing enough loyalty counters that you would destroy it. A less obvious use for this card is that you can remove counters from your own Saga. So your Saga being A-Harald unites the Elves. And what you can do is you can, if the Saga is just on step 1, say you play A-Harald, you see a Thornmantle Striker, it comes into play, you can choose to remove the counter from the Saga. Then what's going to happen is during your next main phase, so presumably your next turn, you're going to get to do step 1 of the Saga again. So that's just a way that you can kind of get a value play in the middle of the game. If there isn't a good target to actually kill with the Thornmantle Striker, you can rewind your A-Harald unites the Elves. You could do it if you'd gotten to step 2, you could do that as well. You could, wind it back down to 1 or 0. You don't have an option of how much you rewind it. It's just going to be dependent on how many Elves you have. But like if you rewind, you can't rewind it to a negative amount either. So it's going to have, 0 or 1 counters on it after you rewind it, depending on the board state. I believe that the buff to this card is that it has a higher starting loyalty. I think it used to have a starting loyalty of 3, and now it's up to 4. This card obviously is only ever going to be good if you're in a dedicated elf deck, but in a dedicated elf deck, it's reasonably powerful. I wouldn't say that this card is necessarily a card you have to play 4 of in your elf deck, but I've been reasonably happy with it. I think it's the worst of these 3/4 drops, though, for sure. Moving on to the 3 drops, we've got Realmwalker. This is unbuffed. This is just, I think that this is the second best of the 3 mana elf cards, which is why it's in my deck. This, I think, is the best, the King of Skemfar. So this has gotten a buff. I think that you used to only look at the top 5 or 6 cards to find an Elf Warrior or A-Tyvar card, and now you look at the top 7. So this is another one of these cards that The Elf deck has a lot of consistency at this point because there are so many of these cards that dig for, whatever elves you need in a particular situation, which is really the way this deck is constructed. You're digging for Thornmantle Striker, A-Tyvar, or Realmwalker pretty consistently. We've got 2 Agadeem's Awakenings. They're kind of more like lands, though. Looking at the 1 and 2 mana plays, so there is one really good 2-drop. The Elvish Warmaster in a dedicated elf deck is just great. If you've ever played elves in Historic, this was one of your better cards in your deck, I would say. And here we've got it in an Alchemy or standard power level deck. And it's very good here, for sure. Then we've got 4 copies of A-Skemfar Avenger. This received a minor buff in Alchemy. It used to say only non-token elf/berserkers you control die. You draw a card. This card has still continued to be a little bit underwhelming. There aren't a lot of decks that really kill all of your creatures that aren't capable of killing this first if they want to. Also, the fact that you draw a card and lose a life actually it can make this card a little bit dangerous to put into play if you're playing against somebody who is playing with Blood Artists. You can make it so that you're going to be generating so many triggers that you're actually just going to kill yourself if they, Meat Hook Massacre a giant board when they've got a Blood Artist in play. So you need to be a little bit careful with this one. I do think that this is probably the second best of the 2-drops. There's a different card that also received the buff that I tried some called Elderfang Ritualist. This is another one of those cards that was from the weird supplemental product that gave us Thornmantle Striker. So this one, when it dies, you can exile it and you get an elf or a A-Tyvar card back from your graveyard to your hand. I thought this was probably worse than the A-Skemfar Avenger. They're pretty similar cards, though. You could, if you wanted to, swap these however you saw fit. I don't know that you wouldn't be making the deck better. Other 2-drops, we've got 1 Masked Vandal, which obviously counts as an elf. This is kind of a way to kill Reflections of Kiki Jiki if you need to. It's also just a 2-drop elf, or you could kill a ranger class that something out of the runes deck. There are targets for this. This card has always been a little bit underwhelming for me in constructed decks because not having it always be on is a pretty big deal. You can't necessarily cast it the turn you want because you need to have an elf in your graveyard. Well, you need to have a creature in your graveyard. In this case, it's going to be an elf almost all the time. This deck does help that a little bit because it's got this milling ability with Harald Unites the Elves, so you're going to presumably have, fill your graveyard up as the game progresses. But you're not always going to be, on turn 2 or turn 3 of the game, you might not be able to use this to do what you want, which is, it's an unfortunate aspect of this card. I think this would be better if it was just, a 1/1 or a 1/2, but it always worked. Unfortunately, that's not the card we have access to, though. Then we've got our 1 non-elf card, which is a random 1 of Prosperous Innkeeper. The logic behind this is that I just wanted a little bit more in terms of ways to ramp into my 4 mana plays, because this deck is really focused on getting to 4 mana to play one of these 4 mana cards. So the treasury gives you a little bit more acceleration to get to 4, and the life gain, if you have an Elvish Warmaster going, you're going to trigger the Innkeeper a lot. You're going to gain a fair amount of life, and that matters. It kind of helps mitigate the whole danger with A-Skemfar Avenger killing you. Moving on to the 1-drops, we've got 4 Jaspera Sentinels, which is the only other acceleration in the deck. It is definitely the best of the 1-mana elves that are available to you in Alchemy. And 2 Tajuru Blightblades. This is very much filler. I would say that the place that you really want this is if you're playing against an aggressive green creature deck, so Werewolf Pack Leader. You're really hoping to block Werewolf Pack Leaders with this. That's why it's in your deck. There's more in the sideboard in case you're going to play that matchup. So this is kind of a curve filler. This is not certainly a standout card. There really just aren't great options for elves at 1 mana, I would say, beyond the Jaspera Sentinel. And I wanted more than 4 1-drops. Moving on to the lands, we've got 25 in total here. The usual pathways and Deathcap Glade, and then there are some Orvars in the sideboard, which is why they're the blue pathways. 1 Takenuma, 1 Boseiju, 3 Lair of the Hydras and a Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and 2 Agadeem's Awakenings. Agadeem's Awakening, you do build up to a pretty good Agadeem's Awakening with A-Harald Unites the Elves, and you've got creatures from 1 to 4 mana. And you've got A-Tyvar, which can produce, a lot of black mana for you. So this is a card that you're going to cast some of the time. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's useful to have. A couple of Forsaken Crossroads. And then we've got the one land that was buffed. The activated ability cost on this land was reduced from 5 mana to 4 mana. And so I'm a little bit torn as to whether this is worth playing or not at this point. I mean, it certainly wasn't before. Now it's a little bit cheaper, but it is a land that enters the battlefield tapped always and only taps for 1 color of mana, that's a really, really steep cost. I've been playing with 1, and I've used it a couple of times, and I've had it screw me by coming into play tapped at least once. So I'm going to keep playing with the 1 for the time being, and we'll see. I would say this is like you're going to want to play 0 to 1 copies in your deck. You certainly don't want to go crazy and play like 3 or 4. I think that would be way too many. Looking at the sideboard, we've got Orvars. We've got some discard for if you're playing against like a blue-white or a Hanada deck. More Blightblades, like I said, you're going to want to board those in against people who are playing Werewolf Pack Leader style decks. Infernal Grasp, just to have a little bit more removal, again, for Werewolf Pack Leader style decks. Also, if you're playing against red-black, it gives you another card that can kill Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. 3 copies of Crippling Fear. This is one I'm pretty excited about. I think anytime you're playing a tribal creature deck that is based on black, Crippling Fear is a really, really good card to have access to. The Werewolf deck and the mono green deck have a lot of creatures that actually die to this in their deck. And the red-black deck that plays Graveyard Trespasser and City Stalker Connoisseur and Reflections of Kiki-Jiki have a lot of cards that die to this. So I think that this is one of the appeals of playing with this deck. Certainly if you played against a White Weenie deck, it's going to be a very strong card there too. So I think that having access to this is one of the payoffs for playing Elves. Notably, I do not have the Meathook Massacre in my deck, and that's because all of my creatures are small creatures. I think that Crippling Fear is just a better option for a sweeper in like a small creature-based deck when you're just a straight-up tribal deck. One, kind of Storm the Festival just to have a little bit of better late game against a slower deck. You can mill it with the A-Harald Unites the Elves and get a little bit of value that way. So that's the deck. Let's go ahead and check it out in some games. This is a reasonably strong hand. I'm going to need to draw a 3rd land or draw a 2-mana creature. But if I can get over that hurdle, I think I'll be in pretty good shape. Guess I'm just going to give them a card out of my deck. My deck is mostly Elf Tribal Synergy cards, so whatever card they got is probably not going to be particularly good. From their perspective, I think that the best they could do, honestly, would be to just get a land. Do I want to kill this, or do I want to play A-Harald Unites the Elves? I think I should play A-Harald Unites the Elves. As is always the case when you're playing with this deck against a black deck, you're really just living in fear that they're going to have Meathook Massacre. They don't. They have the City Stalker Connoisseur. Which of you do I like more? The Striker can get rid of this, which is potentially important. Yeah, I think that's probably the play. Then we'll be able to attack, and next turn we'll have a very strong attack. Because of the third chapter of A-Harald Unites the Elves. Goodbye, backup Realmwalker. So I'm going to get 6 triggers probably, assuming they don't have a 1-mana spell. So I can do 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's a Striker on top of my deck, so I can make it so they can't block at all. In this matchup, I would like some Orvars, for sure. I think I want my Infernal Grasp. I'm a little bit unsure how many Crippling Fears I should have, if any. I think I definitely don't want the Blight Blades. I guess Masked Vandal is another consideration. Maybe I don't need that one, though. I think maybe I want to cut the Innkeeper and a A-Tyvar. Try it like that. This guy would be so much better if he counted himself when he died. He just comes out and he just dies and you don't get anything so often. I'm sensing a City Stalker Connoisseur in my future, which is good news for me. The question if they actually City Stalker Connoisseur me, usually the default play is you just Connoisseur them back. Let's play this turn. I could play A-Tyvar, or I could play A-Harald plus Jaspera Sentinel. I guess I don't have blue mana, so I can't just play the Orvar off the top of my deck. I'm not super worried that they're going to Meathook Massacre me, because it would only be a Massacre for 2 and it wouldn't get rid of the Realmwalker. I think I'll take the backup Realmwalker rather than the Orvar, because the card's getting revealed. So if I reveal to them that I just took an Orvar, they're obviously not going to prioritize making me discard. And I've already got this one Orvar to kind of surprise them if they decide to Undercity Plunder me or play a Connoisseur. I think at this point, the Orvars are just so ubiquitous in this format that a lot of the times the red-black deck is going to be boarding out its Undercity Plunders for games 2 and 3, just assuming that they're going to get hit by Orvars if they have them in their deck. That's right, I've got Tyvar. Deal with it. No, preferably don't deal with it. I could have +1'd this to get it out of range of Molten Impact, but I think that I wanted just at least one extra elf in play. Because the one extra elf is going to make the passive ability on this Tyvar, tapping for black mana, matter more. It's also going to make it so that the striker is able to kill 3 toughness things. I'm going to Thornmantle Striker this and pitch the Orvar to pay the ward. The question is, what am I going to copy? Maybe it should just be a Lair of the Hydra. They did not board out their Undercity Plunders. Looks like one of the better hands my deck's capable of. Turn 3, Herald unites the Elves. Or the Herald, King of Skemfar, if something dies. It's kind of weird that I'm going to be playing the Skemfar Avenger before I play the King of Skemfar. What's this guy going to be avenging if the king hasn't even arrived yet to die? I'm glad that they played the Spikefield Cave. I don't want my Skemfar Avenger being hit by Spikefield Hazard. That'd be awful. This is a white and red deck of some variety. Maybe they're playing the new warrior equipment stuff. We'll have to find out. This is a Jeskai deck, so probably it's like a Hanada Magma Opus deck would be my guess. I guess I'll make this wind backwards play. So what's going to happen is now this is going to trigger again on my main phase, and I already have a Tyvar in my graveyard, so I'll probably just get the Tyvar. And we'll go from there. It tapped my my 4-power thing instead of my 3-power thing. I don't like that. I wanted to attack for 4, not 3. Oh well. Can't always get what you want, I guess. They pitched a Divine Purge. Signals there's a Divine Purge in my future. Really? They pitched Divine Purge and they didn't have a backup. I guess they didn't have double white, but they're taking a ton of damage this turn. If they wanted to, they could activate the hall and eat something. That's fine. Okay. It's a calamity. Oh, they're going to Divine Purge the Divine Purging. They're invoking Calamity Farewell in the middle of combat. That's kind of brutal. I didn't enjoy this experience at all. So the emblem is a -7 ability. I'll have that access to that in 2 turns. This only buff elves. Target elf, so I can't do it to my Lair of the Hydra. I can't afford to send the Hall of Storm Giants at the A-Tyvar because I'll just kill them on the crackback now. I'm guessing that if I get this emblem, they're not going to be able to come back from that. So we'll have to see what they're up to with their turn. They probably need to deal at least some damage to A-Tyvar so it doesn't get the emblem. And make it... They have to answer at least one of these creatures, I would say. Guess they timed out on their turn? I don't know what happened there. I think they were in trouble no matter what they did, but certainly tapping 4 mana and doing nothing was not going to be a way to win. Alright, so this is why I wanted this discard, and truthfully I don't have that much discard, so maybe I should have a little bit more. Maybe the Storm the Festival needs to be a better card in this matchup. I didn't see any Hanadas. They seem to be a deck built around Invoke Calamity, not built around Hanada. So I think the Masked Vandal certainly doesn't do anything. The Strikers are not really at their best in this matchup. Unless I'm removing counters from Herald, they kind of don't have an ability. And I guess the Blightblades don't hit hard enough. I probably don't have enough cards in my sideboard for this matchup. Maybe I could have like a Ranger class or two. No black mana. But a pretty good curve, assuming that I draw a black land by turn 3. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it. Put this on blue. You're not the black land I was hoping for. You're still not the black land I was hoping for. If I draw a black land and then I draw another black land, I'm going to be ready to reunite the elves. I failed. I failed in my elf uniting mission. This is probably doomed at this point. The thing about playing against Divide by Zero decks is if you don't curve out well, you kind of get tempoed into oblivion. Smoldering Egg in their deck now. So I'm gonna put some more strikers back in my deck to deal with the Smoldering Eggs. Problem with playing a turn 1 Sentinel is that I don't have access to black mana on turn 2 if I do that. I think it's better to just wait till turn 3 to play the Sentinel potentially. And be guaranteed to get the 3-1 in play on turn 2. They might have Jwari Disruption, which is fine. If they're disrupting the Sentinel, that's not that big of a deal. Now, if they have a second disruption next turn for the A-Tyvar, that'd be kind of annoying. But A-Tyvar also might just be eating a Divide by 0. Wouldn't surprise me. I guess I potentially missed damage if they have literally nothing, but I'm not surprised that they had something there. You can activate the A-Skemfar Elderhall if there are no targets, so I'll eventually be able to convert this into 2 1/1s. If the game lasts that long. They are taking a pretty hefty amount of damage a turn at this point. Some black, so I can go Duress. Oh, this was modified by the conductive current, so that now it would deal 7 damage. Wow. Certainly don't really want to add to the board at this point. We're already in territory where they're probably going to need a sweeper. They can play the Divide by 0, but they would have to burn both of their treasures to do it. Which they're choosing to do. What are they going to get now? Mascot Exhibition isn't going to be good enough. They got 3 mana, deal 1 damage. I guess that's reasonable against the A-Skemfar Avenger. Or is it? They probably die to the Lair of the Hydra if they spend 3 mana like that this turn. If they have a Smoldering Egg and I don't draw land, that would be bad. You'd also have a card like a Braid, maybe? Fateful Absence. Do it for 4, and then I play around a Braid. Do it for 3, and then I'm still able to play the Sentinel. I don't think playing the Sentinel this turn does that much. Let's just go for 4. I guess I chose wisely. Well, that was fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That was, this deck mostly performed pretty well. And I'm honestly, I'm pretty surprised that Elves has been as good as it has been. But it has, I've won a bunch of games against Red-Black in the way that we saw in that one match I played, where they kind of have a hard time beating Harald Unites the Elves. So that maybe this is the shakeup we needed in Alchemy. And with that, I'm going to leave you, and I hope to see you next time.